So apparently we're here to discuss history and culture of gaming. It says it right there.
Will you please read out?
Did you guys read that?
I didn't.
You didn't? Is everyone on?
I think so.
Hello.
Hello. Yeah.
All right, good.
This is not close enough to my face. Yeah.
All right, so a couple of housekeeping things first before we get started. If you have your cell phones, please silence them. We are live streaming this, so anything you say, everyone else will hear. If you have a 3DS, please turn it on.
Are you
Set your
street
street
passing right
pass
now?
on, because I am street passing people like mad. So that's, and I may even stop the discussions to clear them out depending on how many I get. And with that, we're going to get started. So we'll start with the introductions, and we'll go around the table here. So my name is Chris Melissinos. I'm the guest curator for the Art of Video Games exhibition here at the Smithsonian American Art Museum. I started playing video games in the early 1970s. I started programming at the age of 9. I wrote my first full game by the age of 12. I used to run the Atari and Sega forums at AOL in the mid-90s, and I was the chief gaming officer at Sun Microsystems for well over a decade. So video games have pretty much been part of my entire life. How many people have been through the exhibition already? Very good. Did you guys like it? You can, oh, good. Somebody loved it. That's great.
Give him more of that. He loves it.
Oh, no. So with that, I will pass it to, well, actually, yeah, to my left here.
So my name's Chris Grant, another Chris. I, however, was not playing video games since the early 70s. I wasn't born yet. But, late 70s, early 80s. I'm the editor-in-chief of a new video game website called Polygon, actually headquartered right here in Washington, D.C. Before that, I was the editor-in-chief of a site called Joystick, which maybe you've read for about 6 years. And my interest in, specifically in things like video games, video game culture, and preservation, all sort of circles around the same thing, which is a journalistic responsibility to remember and discuss kind of where we come from to influence where we're going, which is something I think in the press we tend to get really fixated, and the marketing arms of the companies we cover really fixated on what's next, and we don't pay the appropriate respect or attention to what we've done. So having an exhibit like this at an art museum, no less, is I think is really historically significant. And so I'm really excited it's here. I'm excited that there's a bunch of people in a room at a panel at the Smithsonian to talk about video games, which is a little strange and surreal, considering where it usually falls on the cultural totem. So thank you for coming.
Thank you.
I'm J.P. Dyson. I'm at the Strong, the home of the National Museum of Play in Rochester, New York, and the International Center for the History of Electronic Games. They're very long titles. And just to go back with the autobiographical stuff, I first played computer games, and I think I might have talked about this in the book. But my first experience with a game was actually not playing a game. Was my high school had a DEC PDP-11, which, if any of you know, was an old sort of was called mini computer at the time. There's a game on there called Dungeon, which was a version of Zork. And my brother used to play it on a teletype printer. And he'd actually bring home, if you remember the green and white paper with the feeds on the side, he'd bring home this game on the, and we'd discuss what to do next, and go tree, climb tree, and you find an egg in a tree, in a nest, and open egg. We discuss these things. So I actually played the game before even actually playing on a terminal. And so that got me hooked. My next experience, we had an Osborne, which was, does anyone know what an Osborne was?
Yep.
Okay, it was the first portable computer, which was about this big, and a screen about this big. It was definitely portable.
Luggable.
And you had a slave monitor. Played Colossal Cave Adventure, which was another of these text-based adventure games on there, and also Port of Space Invaders in there. So I went to college to be a computer science major because I loved computer games. And when I went in late 80s, there were no such thing as game design majors. And I found out being a computer science major did not usually involve programming games. I switched to history. I also probably wasn't a good enough programmer. But I ended up at the Strong home of the National Museum of Play, and we had the world's biggest play collection. Toys, dolls, games. And it's really how play was changing we realized, wow, video games are having this huge impact on play. Not only the way we play, but the way we learn, the way we relate to one another. And so we began collecting video games, and now we have about 38,000 or so video games and related artifacts, including, I know arcade games came up earlier. We have about 150 arcade games at the museum, and you can play a lot of them in the museum itself if you come and visit. So, and we're in Rochester, New York. So.
Cool, I want to go. I am Jon Gibson. I am the founder of I Am 8-Bit, which is, for all intents and purposes, a creative collective that celebrates and homages very often in all our projects to the 80s sensibility of games. It started as an art show back in 2005, where we had about 100 artists remix all their favorite kind of gaming fantasies and delusions from the 70s and 80s, taking those archaic graphics of adventure and turning it into a full-fledged, amazing rendered painting or plush or sculpture or what have you. And as a company, we've evolved into a full-on production company and collective where we do a lot of like viral video work and events and community activities and marketing stuff for pretty much every major gaming company there is. And one of the things I'm always fascinated by is how much the companies don't really care about archiving their own stuff. As much as we work with Capcom and Nintendo and Square Enix and all these guys, there isn't really any core infrastructure for that kind of stuff within the companies that are making all these classic things that we care so much about. So,
I think one of the most iconic pieces out of the first collection was the Miss Pac-Man made out of the grenade.
Oh yes.
Yes, so an artist actually took an old grenade and cut the mouth out of it and painted it to look like Miss Pac-Man. So here's this grenade, and the firing pin on the top is turned into the bow on her.
The lawyers told us that was the only cover image we could use because it was transformative. And wasn't exactly Pac-Man, it was a grenade as well, so it was making an artistic statement.
Explosive.
Yeah.
I love lawyers. Good times.
So on a personal note, I've had the good fortune of spending some time with these gentlemen here, actually at other conferences where we've actually spoken on panels around the same sort of discussion. So for those of you that are here, you're in for a real treat because you know, the collective body of work of these gentlemen here really span not only the history, but trying to understand what's important about archiving games, how do we catalog our history, what's going to be important moving forward, and how it's part of the culture, everything from, you know, artist reinterpretation of those works into other medium to the preservation of games and really the study and science of how we play to what it means culturally, you know, in the broader sense. And so, you know, I'm very excited to have this discussion. So let's jump straight into it. The history and culture of gaming. When we started building this exhibition at the American Art Museum, we toyed around with a lot of different ideas. You know, what are some of the problems that video games have culturally? How do people kind of view them in society? What are the misnomers about games? And finally, we said, you know, it's important to understand really that video games were an outgrowth of other things that were happening in society at the time, specifically the march of technology into consumers' homes. Ralph Baer, who is the creator of the very first home video game machine, the Magnavox Odyssey, actually, and I'm paraphrasing a bit, but he said, if anyone doesn't believe that computers made their way into homes through video games, must have just landed here from another planet. Because computers were, or video games were the first computers that people had in their home. And one of the things that became very obvious to me in building this was, well, people look at them, or it's easy to understand why people viewed them as the playthings of children because they were first given to children. Although those children have now grown up, those kids, like myself, are now in their 40s with 3 kids of their own, so now we have gamers raising gamers for the very first time culturally. So what I'd like to do is, in that lens, going back and taking a look at this. JP, in some of the work that the Strong does and that you've done specifically, when you're looking at curating this, you get this massive amount of information that comes into the museum. You know, how do you start sifting through and understanding really what's impactful, what's relevant as you're going through this, you know, massive of media and video game ephemera that you collect?
A loaded question.
Yeah. Yeah, I try not to avoid anyone's favorite game here and say, no, that's not important. It's, you know, it's really for us, I guess a lot of it is looking at questions. What are the important questions you want to ask about something? So, and those can really vary. Is it what's the most popular game? There's no way we're not going to have Mario games in there, for instance. A character who's more recognizable than Mickey Mouse. Is it about what games had the most impact in the history of game design? So what games influence other games that influence other games? And going from the games themselves, or another question, what are the most controversial games? What games are the ones that got people talking, that got people debating, got people angry at video games? We need to represent that as well. But what games made people sort of fall in love with the medium? And what we try to do is not just collect the games themselves, but collect things on both sides of the games. So things about games, the media about games, but also the things that show how the games were developed. So if I could use just one example, a game like The Sims. So how do you collect around The Sims? We have the copies of The Sims itself, but some of the other things we have that I love is we have the notebooks that Will Wright used in coming up and designing The Sims. So you can see him coming up with ideas, toying with ideas. And so you go from the producer experience, and then we have media about that, and we have the games themselves. But then one of my favorite artifacts is one that talks about the impact of games. And this, I think, gets back to your point about what impact games have had in their lives. So we have this trifold, sort of like if any of you did a science project, and you have that trifold board where you display something. And it was a girl who did this for a project, and she looked at The Sims, and she tells this whole story using The Sims about this, this couple who meets, and they fall in love, and then actually they go on vacation, and they go on their honeymoon, and the guy dies. And she comes back, and she's going through this whole grieving process. And so she tells this in the course of the game, which is a very moving use of a game to tell a story. But what's most powerful is, it turned out this girl herself, her own father had died. And so that through this game, she was working through this process. And the woman she was working with in creating this had her present about this, and the girl's mother came. And the advisor was really worried because here this girl had been very personal up front about this. And here she's presenting about this to this whole group, about this family tragedy. And it turns out the girl's mother had just started dating again. And the girl was working through this in the course of the game. And the girl's mother came up to the advisor and said, she said, thank you. She said, we haven't been able to really talk about this. And yet I can see through this that she's working through this, that she's going to be okay. And to me, that's gets to the things we want to collect. We want to show how the games were created. How is this magic made? What is the magic? But then also, what is its impact on people's lives and in the way they experience the games and experience their lives themselves? So.
Yeah, I mean, that's been a common theme and finding that we've had in terms of some of the discussion at the museum is the unexpected way that people absorb these games in their lives. I had one woman actually tell me that the way their autistic son learned to speak, I think he was roughly somewhere between the age of 5 and 6, was through Pokemon. Mm-hmm. So being able to play this game somehow triggered something in him that allowed him to start communicating with his parents. And so, it's kind of the unexpected side of that. Going back to something you said earlier, which is, trying to figure out which is the most popular game, and then also trying to figure out how we interpret what they meant. Jon, from an art perspective, is it more important to look at what's popular, or is it equally important to understand what the message was underlying the work?
What's most interesting when we ever do a call to action for artists to interpret for I Am 8-Bit when we do the show, every single time we don't direct anybody to focus on particular games. And one trend I noticed is that Nintendo always gets picked more than anybody. Mario, of all characters, is always the most dominant. Sega does not really ever get chosen. Like Sonic the Hedgehog is usually absent, and we've had in the past 5 shows that we've exhibited probably 2 Sonic the Hedgehog appearances in very slight circumstances, like they're a background player in some other bigger masterpiece. Whereas Nintendo with Mario, Zelda, Link, Donkey Kong, all these characters are very persistent in all these pieces and in different degrees. Some of them are very, very personal. takes. Some of them are world recreations. Like Nintendo, I think of all the companies, has created the most vivid universe and maintained sanctimony in that universe and allowed imagination to persist. There's the instance that Mario, as a character, doesn't really speak. He says, but, it's me, Mario, and like 10 other things, and that still continues to only say those things. And back then, it wasn't really possible for him to speak in the 80s, but now he could say 100 million things. A game like Mass Effect has how many lines of dialogue, whereas Mario still, says the same old 10 lines, if it's even 10 lines. I think with games, imagination has always been the most important thing to me, at least, and that's the essence of what 80s games are and what we're talking about, saving and archiving for the next 100 years is the context of that kind of imagination. And I think that's one of the bigger challenges we face is how do you convey that to someone who never had that experience and who sees hair follicles and every single polygon and can see the textures of fabrics. And back then, Mario had a mustache to cover up the fact that they couldn't make his mouth move. Yeah.
There's a sort of mystery, right? There's like a mystery in those old games that isn't quite clear. I think that comes through in gameplay too. When you talk about actually playing the games, that you would just, if you walk up to that guy 3 times at night, he'll give you, why? I don't know. It just
You
does.
just bugged him enough. Or it's just glitches. I mean, we were talking on this round table earlier today about maintaining the sanctimony of that core experience in that original version of the game versus ROM or versus emulation. And sometimes emulation ruins glitches, and those glitches were sometimes so integral to the experience that if you remove those or they get warped in some way along the process, you lose a lot of context that therefore makes the game less interesting. But you try to explain this to anyone now, and they just think you're crazy. And is the glitch even that important? I mean, I would argue that it is in some circumstances. But.
I mean, it's interesting, especially when you look at, and I'm sure, Chris, in your line of work, you deal with a community that is very vocal. They're very opinionated. They're all correct in whatever they happen to be saying at the time.
Naturally.
Of course. And so there's this discussion right now of, next gen, right? We're kind of up against the next generation of technology that's then going to, create all this incredible possibility. It always seems we're always up against the next big incredible possibility without really taking a step back and understanding the amazing things that have already occurred, right? But to Jon's point, and the point that you were just making as well, is the rendering of each hair follicle and the correct draping of each piece of cloth, is that really what is going to propel games forward, or is it still the underpinnings, the echoes that we have of design going all the way back to the earliest games?
We have to have important? Better hair physics, more clothing physics. If we don't, games are ruined. There's a museum in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, called the Mercer Museum, which is a museum of American tools. It's this incredible, huge building, and there was a panel on the wall that talked about the sculptors, the artists that made ship figureheads on old sailboats. And as steam engines took over, they had all these guys whose craft was making these figureheads. And they found out that their skills were no longer useful. Technology had obviated their careers, and so they had to pivot, and they started sculpting things like cigar store Indians and barbershop poles. And that the proliferation of those things in an era when most people couldn't read was due in large part to the availability, the abundance of people who had that skill set. And when I think about the video game industry, everyone, as the industry is evolving now, it's constantly evolving, right? It's an industry that's defined by technological change. As much as any artistic industry, as ours is just a little more condensed and also violent, those changes. And as we're looking to this next generation, I think a lot of creators are terrified of what it means structurally, the size of the teams you need to do it. And a lot of what we're looking at in next gen is going to be better graphics. It's going to be higher fidelity, which costs more, takes longer to produce. Failure becomes more devastating. And so I think I look at that change as being one of great opportunity. And I think different than previous generations in video game history is that we have this huge abundance of opportunity now, just like those figurehead sculptors. where you have all these people who have the skill set of making video games, but they have tons of different places now to apply that skill outside of just next-gen AAA development. And obviously the simplest example would be iOS games in your pocket. Every week you hear about a new company being started by former Ubisoft developers, former, Nintendo developers, or former EA developers, and that change to me is, and a lot of this harkens back to what the kind of niche audience for old games. So you have games that evoke an old school aesthetic, or even something like Fez, downloadable game that evokes an old school play style where it's full of that kind of mystery. And that only happens when you have the tools and the distribution channels necessary to create games for a small audience that cares about that language of old games and kind of a shared kind of cultural history of games. And that to me is the most exciting thing about where we're going now, and I find it much more exciting than any previous generation that I've been a part of.
It's interesting. I was just thinking about, to me, what always strikes me about this whole more distributed model of game development is, as a historian, look at sort of the Back to the Future effect of it. Because you look at the early years of the games industry, it's single individuals, it's small groups of people making games and finding ways to get them out there. And someone with a computer could create a game that was almost as good, or if they're really...
They should distribute them in little plastic
baggies.
Ziploc
bags, exactly.
Yes.
It's like we're getting back to that.
Yeah, exactly, and we're getting back to it, which opens up huge amounts of possibilities for the games. You don't need to be doing a AAA title to break into the game space. I mean, I mentioned growing up, I could say I could write games myself, and they weren't as good because I wasn't a good enough programmer, but the people who were good programmers could write games that were as good as those they developed commercially. When you're growing up if you're growing up in the early 90s, you're playing a console, your average kid has no way of conceptualizing, oh, I could create a game like that. But now, there are all these distribution models, there's tools, software tools out there, you can create a game.
There's also schools, right? So these kids are growing up, I think a lot of kids who grew up and played most of their games in the 90s, you're right, they grew up playing console games that seemed, number one, a lot of the games they played were coming out of Japan. So that seemed a world away, literally. Number two, it was bigger productions, and even then it might have been a 20-person team, but that's way beyond your bedroom aspirations. Whereas if you grew up a decade earlier, you would have been playing games by Richard Garriott or Sid Meier or anybody who was able to start small and kind of build up in the early days. And we're getting back to that point where you talk to kids now that are going to school, and who are their heroes? It's Notch, right? It's indie developers that are doing this stuff with much smaller teams, with new distribution opportunities, and it's changing, I think, a lot of where this industry is going to go when those kids graduate and they start making games, and they can do it from any city in the country, not San Francisco or Montreal or Austin. It's the possibility there is really staggering. And I think you're going to see like a bifurcation where there's going to be fewer and fewer AAA games that will have to be bigger and bigger successes, and that's fine. They'll probably still have those. But you'll see a lot more of the other stuff kind of filling in people's entertainment time.
I think that plays to accessibility, too, of creators. Like a guy like Tim Schafer has a voice online, and he has fans in a community. And all these guys have access to the great wiles of the internet, which is amazing. But with a AAA game, who often makes that game? You have no idea. There's no spokesperson beyond the marketing spreadsheet of the 10 things that you're supposed to say about it when asked about it in public.
Well, that's the thing, like journalistically for us, like there are people that make those games. And there's a lot of really interesting people that make those games. And there sometimes even are singular creative voices inside those development teams.
But they're often
they're hidden.
Cloaked.
Yeah, well they're not cleared for media access, or they don't have a story that fits the marketing points. And so, it's like I said before, a lot of our responsibility, I think, as journalists, a lot of what we're trying to do at Polygon is to try and put people back into those stories and try and make these stories about human beings again instead of about things, because things inherently aren't that interesting to people. It's interesting to maybe a lot of the people in this room. That game's got how many guns? Awesome, it's way more guns. But ultimately,
Is that what it says on the big sticker?
Man,
now with more guns.
You look at go to GameStop, look at the back of the boxes sometimes. Well, quad wielding, you're like, oh, that's so cool. You can hold how many guns at once? But those are the marketing bullet points that we lean into, and that in the press we're kind of expected to regurgitate. And one of the examples I always use in terms of talking about what we want to write about is behind the music, right? Like, you don't have to like Journey's music to like the behind the music on them, because it's a bunch of interesting people doing something. I think that's true of everything. You hear about how, behind the scenes for a movie. Mm-hmm. It's interesting. You don't even have to like the movie. Like, is there drama on the set? Do people disagree? When we talk about games and game culture, and we get to these smaller teams again, people that are interested in talking about what they're doing or their creative conflicts, right? Watch Indie Game the movie and look at like how much conflict is on a 2-person team. And we have games with a 200-person team, and when we're told there's no conflict, everyone agrees. Everyone loved this feature.
Well, but okay. So now here's what I'm going to challenge you on it. So there's a couple things that you all brought up that I want to go back and touch on. So we'll start in reverse order. The question as to whether or not there is a principal voice that carries the game forward, is that something that is desirable? Is something that we really want to look to? Is that really what those artists are seeking? And I'll also say that to frame that question is when you look at a lot of music, since you brought up the music industry, how many studio musicians, touring musicians that nobody's ever heard of, but they're known within those particular communities. They are the ones that you call when you're going to go and do, a year-long world tour that you wind up bringing with them, but they're not necessarily known to the public. Again, you look at the movie industry, you go see a James Cameron film, mm-hmm. Yes, he's the voice that carries it, but there are hundreds of people behind him that you've never heard of that are bringing his vision forward. So the question, again, is, does everyone that's involved in the process need to be frontline name, or is it just going to be an outgrowth of a creative vision that then guides the hands of other artists, which is not unique to video games. It's in every form of art or expression. We see that same sort of mechanic or institutionalization of that process.
At a certain point in AAA games, you cross a line from artist to craftsman, right? And like there's that line where somebody's doing a skill and they're doing it very well, but it's very much under the direction or tutelage of somebody else. When you also look at AAA development, like a lot of times it's not the game director that's the most interesting person, right? It's the level. It's like there's another person that's really a creative force on the game that has an interesting story to tell. It's a problem getting to that person and finding out what that story is. A lot of times we do find the stories, and it means us going and talking to the marketing and PR people and saying, hey, we want to tell the story, and they're saying, nope, like we're not interested in telling that story. So yeah, it does become a challenge, and it, some of it's also that people on the team don't want to talk about themselves because it's a team effort, and they don't want to say, I'm doing this great part, this creative contribution, because it seems to favor one person over another. But it's another thing I think that's interesting journalistically about getting to smaller games is that it makes our job easier in terms of isolating and narrowing the responsibilities of people to find creative vision, creative force, people that are able to kind of speak directly to what they're doing, which I think just makes them, journalistically a more interesting product to read. You want to read about what somebody's doing as opposed to the kind of thing itself, which ultimately at the end of the day, somebody can also go play. We're going to hear us write about it. I think
you can pass the ball.
Right. From a collection standpoint, what worries me about this, the OCD part of my brain, is that like if we're doing, for comparison, you said that the Strong is 38,000 games.
Games-related materials.
Games-related materials. Okay. How many games do you think there are? Top of your head.
More than 20,000, I think.
Okay, so more than 20,000. And Library of Congress, they said, had 4,000 games. So like, collecting and curating and managing kind of archives of games is already really hard. What happens when, as is already happening now, the creation of games explodes? It explodes into various channels that we don't necessarily have control over or even access to. That's the part about like how the industry is changing, and it's changing in a sort of managed chaos kind of way. Like, how on earth do you even think about that? Do you just not think about it? Drink a lot.
All those apps. Block that off. Yeah.
John just hires people to worry about it for him.
No, I mean that's a huge, and why that game explosion is a whole stuff being, as the previous panel was talking about, stuff being born digital, and how do you deal with that? I mean, how many games are coming out every day, and do we collect every one of those games? And that's something that we're just avoiding the whole issue and hoping this digital thing just goes away, and we're pretty sure it will. It's something that we're studying that problem. We have good men on that right now.
Top men.
Top men, yes. So that is a huge problem, and that will probably get at some level of curatorship. And so you can't collect everything. So what are the questions you need to ask about what you do collect? Again, those goes back to the beginning. What are the issues? Is it, and some of that for me as a historian, when I first got into video game preservation, I thought, well, what are the models out there? So I looked at other things. I know some people look at history of film. I looked at the history of the book, and what are the questions that people ask about the history of the book? And oftentimes, what you have you have a series where at first, when people first started studying literature, they just studied the text itself. So a book like Huckleberry Finn, you just look at what does Huckleberry Finn say about, say, race relations in the United States, or about growing up. And then people begin to expand the circle. They say, well, let's look at Mark Twain, and let's look and see what was going on in his life when he was writing it. And then people begin to expand the circle even more and say, well, what about the whole business of publishing? How did that grow into the type of book that could be created? And then people begin to say, well, what about the readers? How do readers respond? This whole idea of reader response. And so you ask these sort of questions. And so I guess we try to bring some of the same things to video games. What are the questions we need to be asking? And then, therefore, what do we need to collect? And given that we're never going to be able to collect this whole sort of tidal wave of games, it's just going to, I'm sure there's sort of a Moore's law of video game probably that, it probably increases by, doubles every year and a half or something, the number of games out there. And so then what are the salient questions we need to ask to try to make our best guesses? And we'll invariably guess wrong in a lot of cases. We'll get that game that no scholars want to look at for the next 300 years, but hopefully, and probably the ones that we collect by accident will be the ones that people say, this is the gold mine, the one they should have gotten all along. But that's, I think that process of asking questions, I think, is a key one. A lot of different voices and ways of looking at it. We're one, but artists or other people are ways.
Well, I think that's where the individual comes in, too. I think to answer your question from earlier, the idea of the one creative visionary isn't necessarily that important. I believe there are a lot more out there than people like to let on. And some just don't want to talk about stuff. Stanley Kubrick of games just might not want to discuss this stuff with you right now, but on his deathbed, he might. But there's not a lot of access to the names even until that game comes out and you see the credit scroll. Like you don't.
Well, now that we have credits, though.
Yeah, but like
IMDb, 10 years ago, they didn't have credits on most of the games.
But they did have American McGee's Alice.
Oh, well, true.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. Like IMDb, like for a filmmaker, if I'm interested in director of photography positions and who, photographed this film versus that film, I can just go look it up right now and I can find out. With games, I can't look up level designers in the last 10 years of games I really enjoyed. I kind of can.
Well, that's because the filmmakers they're unionized, right? It's like there's rules about how you get credit, who gets credit, how much work you have to put in for credit. Just last week, there was another controversy that blew up on Twitter about some Darksiders 2 contributors not being credited properly because they only contributed part-time as contractors and they, whatever. But like we don't have rules across the industry. Certain developers or certain studios or publishers have certain rules about how we credit people, but even then, a lot of those are newer now that games have taken on this sort of massive production values. But it's really hard if you want to go write about, Booger Man from Sega Genesis, like who designed the levels and you can't find who even did the design, who's the director on it.
Does anyone want to take credit for Booger
Does
Man?
anybody want to take credit?
What's even more amazing though is the way films were credited back in the day was it's by the foot. So they would put so many names on the credit scroll as they could afford. So they'd budget per name per line. And then they started putting more names per line. And then on big blockbusters, you just forget people because they weren't insignificant to the overall. And you don't want to spend $400 making the print or that negative of that thing.
Yeah, I think part of the problem that we're talking about here is really just sits within the medium itself and the fact that it's gone through this hyper evolution. I mean, it's 40 years young, right? Atari celebrated its 40th anniversary this year. And for all intents and purposes, that's the way most of the American public kind of framed video games in the within that particular era, which is how we actually structured this exhibition, was to follow not every single platform that came out or or every single important game from each era, but what really iconified video games in the mindset of American audiences for each of their respective eras, which is why, as somebody asked before, there is no Neo Geo, there is no TurboGrafx 16, there's no Amiga 500, there's no 3DO, Atari Jaguar, there's none of those things. As much as two of them I would have loved personally to have seen in there. The top one, of course, being TurboGrafx 16, which is an amazing machine, but it wasn't synonymous with video games in the United States. So part of this, again, comes from a lack of maturity of the industry in terms of trying to figure out, for instance, the credit example. that isn't an issue that's specific now. Warren Robnett had to go ahead and figure out a way to embed his name as an Easter egg in Adventure to make sure that he got a credit because Atari never wanted to credit their artists. So it's not a problem that it has emerged. It's a problem, I think, that with any medium that makes its way to an audience that tends to have a capital sort of expectation or a thrust that pushes it there, right? A commercialization of it. They want to kind of guard that just as a trade secret. They want to kind of hide those artists. I think what's happening, though, with the democratization of tools, of access, of distribution, of communities, that stuff melts away very, very quickly, which is why you can have all of a sudden something blow up on Twitter, which 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, just wouldn't have happened. It now becomes, kind of a focal point. So the reason for that big, long run-on sentence is to kind of bring us back to some of the history piece of this. We were talking about game creators are scared about cost going up in the face of new technology. Democratization of game development is going to allow other new ideas with smaller teams to make their way into market. What's old is new again, right? We got these systems back in the early 1980s, these computers, and basically they gave you your Commodore 64, which included not only the ability to play all of these games, but to make all of these games. Tools came in the box. We're looking at the open source platform, Ouya, right. Which, hey, buy this $100 console, and now you get not only all these games in the service, but you now have the tools to make your own games. Within that comes the challenge of understanding what games are worth your time and attention. Right? Much as we saw in the early 1980s with the proliferation of content that was so vast and 90% of it was just terrible, so the market kind of moved away from the console space and went, I can't make heads or tails of these things, which is why we bargain bin this. It wasn't entirely that, but it's kind of the gist of it. So do you foresee the problem of, with the democratization of tools, this massive amount of content also becoming an issue to find out which is worth preserving, which is worth your time?
I think we already have that explosion, right? There's some estimates say 100 games a day being released on the iOS App Store. Like, there's a staggering amount of software that bubbles up. That's far more than the Atari crash of '83. They didn't have 100 games a day being released. The difference today is that it's not a retail market; it's a virtual market, and so we have self-healing, self-policing systems already in place in the marketplaces to do it. Like the companies that figure out, and the companies that have even thought they've figured out how to play the iOS App Store marketplace, they're worth a lot of money. They get bought, and a lot of times the success of your app on that market has to do with what you call it. It is like if you have a licensed game, it's going to do better. If you have a game with zombies in the title, like it does better, as silly as it is. I mean, and that's frustrating, right, from a creative standpoint, that you kind of have to play these games to succeed. It's true, like if you have the right in-app purchases, if the right launch day price, if you get the right review from somewhere, reviews for those games are bought and sold, which is very strange. And so, it becomes a much more complicated scenario to survive. And you see big companies wading into those waters with a bunch of indies playing the same games, trying to figure out like how to succeed. EA is a notable example here. They've been very successful on the App Store, and they have all sorts of tricks. Apple, for example, freezes the charts the day before Christmas until after New Year's every year. And so EA put a bunch of its licensed games up, dropped all their prices to $1. They shot up the charts, and then everyone that got iPhones and iPads all throughout Christmas, when they went to the stores, all the top downloads were EA games. That's over and over again. Yeah, and
guilty. I bought in.
Did you buy like all the games? Yeah,
pretty much.
So they did that. They made a fortune. It showed up on their next earnings. It was so significant. And all the indie developers that made great games that got released in that window didn't chart. And by the time the charts opened up again, they were already way down and buried.
The flip side to that is, while I bought almost every game in there, I can't tell you the last time I played any of them.
Because EA made pretty bad ports.
That's not but that's really not the problem. The question is that you've got all this content, this mass amount of content, and yes, we have these transient pops that happen in culture, pop culture, and then it disappears. So even with this massive amount of content that is now available to people, it's always the same 5 to 10 games that are always at the top of those charts, with 100, 1,000 times more trailing behind it than we see in the traditional space. So again, the democratization piece is great, but we can't predict where that's going to pop. Minecraft is a great example of this, right? And Mark has even come out and said, Notch has come out and said, lightning in a bottle, like you can't predict this.
I think a lot of it, I mean, his success is crazy, but it has a lot to do with him having a voice and people in the industry respecting him and him also putting his name out there, not from an ego standpoint, but just from, I'm a person, I'm making this thing.
And from a responsibility standpoint, like
Yes.
I'm making this is,
Yeah, and like I think that's invaluable. I think people dramatically underestimate the power of marketing and PR, and not in the instance that you need a whole division to do it, but
people like stories. You know, like when you're looking at Minecraft, when people bought it as an alpha and saw a game that was really interesting, and they have a guy who's building it, writing on a blog every day, telling them what he's changing, what he's adding, what he's fixing, listening to people, you know, feeding back into it. So there's a sort of active development cycle that created, and doing it again on Twitter and on his blog, that created a kind of a relationship that those early players who became evangelists were invested in. You know, like, and that is the role of personality. You know, like that's I mean, it's I think it's just it's as old as time, right? It's as old as storytelling.
Yeah, and
itself.
actually,
Woody Allen is a good example of such a thing. He's not the most successful
Great game
filmmaker in the world, but you know Woody Allen. Like, Woody Allen to you is the same person off screen as he is on screen.
Yeah.
And he's become this guy who makes terrible movies sometimes and amazing movies sometimes. But he's still that guy, and you will always trust him and to invite you into some sort of experience.
Yeah, the thing with the Minecraft discussion is he even basically started to talk about his wedding, right? He got married during the launch of all this, and kind of the community shared it. Oh, congratulations on getting married, not, you know.
Now he feels like a friend.
It does,
kind of.
exactly.
Which is important.
So this ties into the other part of this, which is the culture of gaming, and we're going to go back again, talk a bit more about the history, but let's talk quickly about the culture of gaming. What is a gamer?
That's a funny term. I somewhat reject it. I'm not a booker
Yeah. I mean,
or a movier.
yeah, exactly. Movies are always the thing I think about. I mean, I think we don't say I'm a movier or a movie watcher, and
We do say I'm a runner, I'm a cyclist, I'm a swimmer.
Okay, so
Right.
where does
You're
it?
an athlete, though, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, where does gaming fit in the
By the
spectrum?
way, I'm none of those.
Yeah.
So don't read anything into that.
That's because you're a gamer, no?
If my wife is watching, I will get to the gym soon, I promise.
But to me, just following up on your point, I mean, I think we're moving beyond that point where, like, I don't watch that many movies. I'm probably, you know, sort of, some of it we have kids, and there's just not a lot of time, and
Or you watch kids movies.
Yeah, we watch kids movie, yeah, which is sometimes worse than not watching any at all. But I don't consider myself not a movier. I'm not a movie watcher. And the same thing, I think we're getting to the point increasingly where gaming is getting so pervasive that may mean you're playing Words with Friends once a month, or Solitaire, or Euchre online or something, or you're playing WoW obsessively. But you're a gamer at some point.
If you look at the statistics, you know, for let's say high school aged kids today, you know, what percentage plays games? 100%. Like statistically, all of them do. And so it seems like a pretty arbitrary distinction. Like, I'm an oxygen breather. That's what I do. That's my thing. Don't know about you guys. It just seems like, I don't know, it seems like an arbitrary thing. Like, a lot of people play games, and it's I don't know. I think to your point, like, a lot of people do identify as gamers, and it's a huge part of their cultural identity. It's a huge part of their personality. It's a huge part of their social network. And certainly growing up, I mean, I grew up in high school. I grew up, I learned how to use computers my whole life by taking them apart with my friends and figuring out how to get that one game to run with audio in it, you know, or how to dial in somebody, or sharing that first Doom shareware disc you got with your friends. And so it was definitely a social experience, but I don't know, it's not one I define myself by.
Well, the term gamer is kind of the term snob. Like, I remember
Yeah.
I used to be a journalist writing for all sorts of game magazines and tech magazines, and I used to get every single game in the mail, like you probably do all the time. And
You'd be surprised, they're
yeah,
stingy.
and there were less games, thank goodness, but to the same extent, I was playing a lot more games then than I am now, not being a journalist, just because that was my job then. But as I started to recoil and start doing other things and not be a professional journalist of games anymore, those professional journalists started like rubbing it in. They're like, oh, you're not a gamer anymore. Like, you don't play games. It's like, well, there is a dramatic difference, and it's like,
Have you
I
seen
still
us-
appreciate games, and I still follow games. I do not play as many games as I used to. But
We can wag our
games
fingers
are
pretty hard.
Games are often more terrible now than they were back then too. There's a lot more crap out there.
Well, see, that's where I tend to push back. I mean, I think everyone thinks, everyone thinks the fiber of America is disintegrating in front of us. When you look at divorce rates, they were higher back then because we just don't bother getting married anymore. But like things change, and everyone has rose-colored glasses for the way things used to be. And I think that, for me, I see tons of creativity in games and gameplay today, but you have to look beyond the sort of superficial trappings of what you're playing, what you're seeing. And so my point before about like the figurehead sculptors is like, there's so much opportunity and so much creativity happening now, but you need to curate, you need to find it, because it's noisy out there. It's noisier than it's ever been. And that to me is really exciting, but if you just listen to, or look at the best-selling chart, listen to the marketing, yeah, you're going to see Call of Duty and Modern Warfare. You're going to see a lot of shooters. You're going to see Battlefield 3, and you're going to see
a lot of derivative stuff that is...
A lot of derivative stuff, yeah. But even then, even if you unpack the mechanics of those games, you can find a lot of really smart things happening inside. But for the most part, I think what's really exciting to me, one of the most exciting games that I can remember in the last couple of years is Words with Friends. And there's a lot of reasons it's exciting. It's exciting because my girlfriend plays it half hour a day, like maybe minimum, probably more. My dad, who's been in a wheelchair for a decade, can't use a lot of his limbs. He can touch his iPad. He can play Words with Friends, which he does every single day. My mom plays it. Friends play it. You say Words with Friends to anybody, they know that game, and it's just Scrabble. It's Scrabble on an iPhone with an asynchronous connection. And then when you actually back up even more and get to the developers who made it, it's made by a bunch of guys who cut their teeth creating some of the most critically acclaimed RTS games in the world. Like, everything about that game is interesting as a statement of where the industry is today. And that to me is like, the creativity of it isn't the gameplay because it's Scrabble. It's the idea. It's the opportunity.
I think the community behind it is the most impressive part,
Yep.
because no one plays Scrabble anymore on the dining room table. That doesn't happen.
As a game, yeah, when you play it, I play it now, and I'm like, oh, man, this takes forever.
It's like Monopoly.
just-
like no one wants, like, oh man.
Nobody plays Monopoly. So the first person who makes asynchronous Monopoly is going to get
Yeah.
rich.
Though actually, just be devil's advocate here. There's this whole Eurogames board game movement.
Absolutely.
Is a reaction. It's getting people to face, you're playing Settlers of Catan or Carcassonne or
Which you can now buy
Dominion.
at Target next to
Yep.
Monopoly.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. half of my local Barnes and Nobles have games now. They don't even sell physical books
I didn't know
anymore.
Settlers of Catan was a board game until I played the Xbox Live version. And then my friend's like, you want to play Settlers? I'm like, oh yeah, I got my... No, and then she brings a box over. I'm like, what? And I was enthused. I was like, that's amazing. Then it
what's
took
weird?
forever. And
Hasbro's making a Words with Friends board game,
Yeah. Well,
which
yeah.
is just Scrabble.
I mean,
They are. It's true.
there. That's great.
It's true.
I just want to follow a couple points I think that you guys made, and I think that maybe gets the whole question of why games in a museum, maybe. And I think it's an argument for the cultural importance of gaming. And just 2 points, and I think there are many reasons why, and you guys probably dealt with this a lot, why, I remember even when you talked to GDC before you even, we're going to have video games as a Smithsonian. 2 things. One is this idea that everyone's a gamer. We're at a point now where, and you've talked about this, and the people who come here, how it brings generations together. It's such a part of our cultural fabric. We deserve to be treating them. And another point I just want to touch on quickly, and again, you guys just referenced this, is the role of gaming. Not only do we do it a lot, but how important it is in making us digital natives. So this term digital natives, the idea that there's a generation somewhere where people grew up speaking digital and not. And I don't know where the age is. I always feel like I'm a little bit on the borderline at 42. But how, if we push that metaphor forward in terms of language, how do you acquire a language? Well, it's usually by, it's from your earliest years and how you interact with the adults around you, how you play often. And to me, games are how people learn to speak digital. And in that sense, they're having this profound impact. And so what you see, I think, is you see the way people learn to play games becomes the way they learn to interact with computers. And they're having this profound cultural impact beyond just the gameplay itself. We're becoming digital natives because we play games.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. In fact, my opinion, the term gamer is just kind of this vestige of what happened in the past. I mean, it's really funny. You go back 20 years, if you played with a computer, you were antisocial. If you do not have a computer today, you're antisocial.
Well, I think that's interesting, right? So part of, I think, gamer is reaction.
It's the way we were able to say, at a time when nobody else knew what was going on, we're trying to figure it out culturally. It's a way to identify that, okay, you're curious about something that nobody else understands either.
We can hang out.
We can hang out.
Yeah.
And just to,
But let's hopefully just do it over our headsets.
But see, but there wasn't headsets. When I was growing up, I
Z-term.
grew up in Flushing, Queens, New York in 1982. My first computer was a Commodore VIC-20, 3,193 bytes of space in which to create games. And there was no BBS that I had access to. It was all playground discussion of other people who had machines. And literally, you'd walk city blocks after school to get to a friend's house. I remember this kid, Greg, got a copy of Gorf for the VIC-20. And I walked like an hour plus just to play for like 50 minutes and go, oh crap, it's getting dark, and have to turn around and walk all the way back home to the city. And for the rest of the night, it's like, oh my God, I played the most amazing thing I've ever seen. I can't believe this thing actually works on my machine. How can I save enough money to go get it? And so you kind of had, that's the way you identified yourself to each other. And that just kind of stuck with us. And one of the things that I heard at MagFest, Georgina and I were there to talk about the exhibition before it opened. And people were lamenting, oh, the social gamer, and non-gamers are coming into our space. And my argument is everybody's a gamer. Video games are just another step on the evolutionary platform socially for us as human beings. I mean, it's just another way of engagement.
Right, and to John's point, like, the term gamer in a lot of ways is elitist. It's like, this is ours, stay out. Yeah. I think the great thing about an exhibit like this, so something like the Strong's collection, putting video games on a pedestal, if you will. I'm starting to hear more and more from parents. I've been doing this for about 7 or 8 years, writing about games, and for a long time, I would identify maybe Doom as one of the most meaningful, historically meaningful, important games of all time. A large part because of the intense focus and scrutiny on the game. It's something that's inappropriate or wrong or bad. Even though when that happened after Columbine, Doom's graphics, even at that point, were humble. I was so glad they weren't looking at like Quake 3 or something. I think a lot of people were fixated on the controversy for a long time. To your point about like what's important, Mortal Kombat and Doom, and now, and so parents would ask me like, my kid plays too many video games. What do I do? Like they'd ask me that question, and I would always say like, nothing, because like that's fine, that's perfectly normal. Now I have a lot of parents ask me the question of like, my kid plays video games, like how do I get involved? Like as in what do I do from the other way? Which I think is a huge difference. Like, when you see a kid playing World of Warcraft, a lot of parents think it's innately antisocial. They're locked up in their room until you explain to them, like, no, they've got 12 people on that headset, and they're actually coordinating a whole group of, like, your kid's 13, and he's a guild leader with a bunch of 30-year-olds. Like, that's pretty cool. And, like, they don't realize how social that activity really is.
Until those 30-year-olds all of a sudden hear his real voice go, what?
Yeah, takes off the
You're
voice
leading us into
modulator.
battle? Right, exactly.
Like, interestingly, too, to your like idea of the quest to see this game, this happens virtually now, where people are questing to find this particular thing they heard rumored within their circle, and they find that object, be it a sword or be it a mythic beast or dragon you're going to slay. Yeah, the world events that happen that just fizzle and go away the next day, but you within your little community of virtual people have experienced that thing. Much like, my buddy Gabe has this wonderful series called Life in the Analog Age, where he grew up in rural Pennsylvania. He had Ataris and Nintendos and Transformers, and he has this one comic where he just talks about this kid in school who had a Transformer that he'd never heard of before. And he, like, where is this kid? Like, no one knew his name. Like, he had to go around in the schoolyard, like, oh, I heard this kid has this Transformer. Like, what's his name? Like, what does it transform into? And like that's what, yeah,
really. What was it? What was his name? Well, what's the name of the Transformer? You have a
I don't remember. It was like
Can somebody look it up?
Man. Yeah. I don't know.
The ladybug. Oh, it was terrible.
But like we don't really get that in the physical world anymore. But it's transferred over to some degree. Like there's no chatter like that, but it's growing in a different way, which is neat. Like it's really cool to see that.
Yeah, I mean, and I think part of it goes back to challenging what it means to game, right? And something that, I don't know if I've actually ever told this here, but I did tell it at MagFest before. My wife doesn't play video games except for Farmville. And
So she's a
Not a
gamer.
game.
Yeah.
she's a gamer. Although no, I don't play PC. In fact, I will tell you this too. I was going through a bunch of old handhelds and stuff, and I found a Palm Tungsten, and there was a game called Acid Solitaire, and the top 2 cards were in the top corner. She played the game so much that she broke the device because the top screen and the bottom touch screen got stuck together, so it would no longer respond anymore. I said, I've never broken a machine playing a video game. You have. So don't tell me you're not a gamer.
Repetitive
but,
stress.
It was one of these things where I said, I don't understand what the grasp is. I built a Galaga ship out of bales of hay on my farm and Puka from Dig Dug, and then I'm like, all right, I'm done. I don't get it. And she said, well, of course it's a game. I said, but to what end? She said, to whatever end I choose it to be. She said, I only plant flowers that I think bloom nicely. I only plant them in arrangements that I feel are nice. And so I'm satisfied when I see that occur. And she's like, it's to whatever end I choose the game to be. And it's the first time she really changed my perception in terms of what a video game could be. Because she's absolutely right. She found the game for herself within this construct that then allows for personal expression. So the idea that social games aren't real games is a misnomer. Of course they are, but they just happen to be very personal to the people that are playing, even though they're designed for a wider range.
They're also very young. Like, those companies are still figuring out what works for people, what works for different audiences. I mean, Zynga, look at their stock price. They're still figuring it out,
Yeah.
And I think that's really telling. We know that there's a market. We know that there's new avenues. There's new entry points for gaming. In this case, it's Facebook, or it's your browser, it's your phone, or it's whatever. All that stuff is an opportunity to find new audience and to create new types of games, new types of experiences. Some of those experiences don't look like the ones that we're used to. They look very different. They look very casual. They look very ungame-like. I look at Minecraft. I'm not a big Minecraft player. I watch people play Minecraft. I'm like, what? So you built a spaceship and you just you built a like, it's not what I'm into. But then you hear about somebody who spent a year recreating a level of BioShock in it. That's like, oh, okay. There's a certain audience for that type of thing, and it's about self-expression. It's about play. Yeah. And it's a little different. I prefer a more curated experience. But there's a lot of different types of experiences that are all defined by games, and I think the fun part now is having all these niche audiences be served, despite how small their interest is and how kind of niche and strange, obscure it is. They can still have a well-made experience because there's somebody out there that is also into the same thing.
Well, and it's affordable to make those kinds of games that can also cater to that niche audience, which wasn't possible way back when, or was, but it was being shrouded by distribution channels like plastic bags at conventions.
There's a game that just came out on Xbox Live Arcade last week called Dust that is if you like platformers, it is one of the most gorgeous 2D platformers you'll ever see, all hand-drawn art. It was made by one guy. He won the Dream Build Play competition and was just a demo, and then spent the next couple of years just working on it, teaching himself how to do all this stuff, and it just came out on Xbox Live. And it's if you like 2D hand-drawn platformers, there's a lot of people that do. That market disappeared, but now this guy made it himself. And that's really incredible, having that opportunity. Him having the opportunity to make a game by himself, us having the opportunity to play something that was lost to time at some point. As a viable genre, that's exciting. It's what's old is new again. I think a lot of that stuff, we were talking before, sometimes gameplay doesn't necessarily get old or fail. It just doesn't look the same anymore. And so just like we want to remake an old movie because the special effects don't look quite right to a modern audience, old games just don't look quite right, but sometimes they still play just fine.
One of the things we explore in the exhibition is the advancement of, or what technology has afforded artists with each new generation, but how if you peel back those graphics, if you peel that back, it's the same echoes of design and mechanics that still persist to this day. So, again, the technology just allows for a greater expression, but we still fall back into things that make a particular type of game that particular type of game. So you can kind of self-identify through that. Peel it back, and you're all the way back to Pitfall, to Mario, to the same sort of jumping adventure mechanics that you probably find in Dust.
Yeah, or Pitfall. or any sort of the Jungle Hunt, those arcade games. Those fast, take a game like Temple Run. I mean, it's really not this. It's pretty much the same.
Have you played the new Pitfall?
No, I haven't played
It's an
it.
exact clone of Temple Run.
Oh, is it?
Literally identical.
Full circle.
Yeah, yeah, and actually, it was at the museum we have the chance to see, because we have about a lot of our arcade games, probably about 50 of our arcade games out for people to play, and you see how people, kids will go up there and they'll grasp, and they're terrible at the game. The games just suck tokens like crazy, but a lot more expensive than 99 cents, that's for sure. Plays all arcade games, but kids get them immediately. They are still playable. Very playable.
There's a joke. I used to work in animation quite a bit and write scripts. And The Simpsons gets floated around a lot as basically telling every story there is in television. Like, they've been on the air for, 22, 23, I don't know how many years now. But they basically told every story you can possibly tell. And you think it's funny because you watch an episode and you're like, I don't understand. But at its core, if you peel it back, like you're saying, it's, the story of a boy falling in love with a girl, or, a mom learning to raise a child. Like, there's all this simplicity that exists within every media imaginable, but no one ever really looks at the core of it.
Yep.
And that's why certain people are drawn to romantic comedies versus dramas versus thrillers versus, action movies. It's the same thing happening over and over. It's just stylized differently.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is recap what we've discussed here, throw one more at you, and we're going to open up for questions. So we've discussed, in starting to talk about the history, society learned about computers through games, and it was a way to make games easily accessible. It breaks down the fear barrier of adopting technology, and it's why people thought they were still video games were the plaything of children, because that's where we got them. We find that they're a reflection of our society and the people who play them, and we see people acting out their life stories within these games and having that social contract to share them. Game creators are scared because the costs are going up, but democratization of game development is going to help to allow new expressions to come into being and reach a global audience. That the art and the message underneath is as important as the gameplay itself. And so with all those things, and we looked at, again, finishing up with the culture of gaming, how it's really not specific to any one culture. It may have started there, but it really encompasses everyone. And really, it's just an evolution of the games we play as human beings, right? It's just another step forward. So I'll leave you with this thought, and then we'll open up for questions. I want you to answer to this. So I believe that technology has gotten to a point now where technology is no longer the barrier. It's no longer the barrier to entry. So what I think is really going to start happening, which I think is incredibly exciting right now, is that artists are going to start limiting themselves to force new forms of art, just as we saw with the abstract movement, where it's no longer about trying to define realism. It's about pulling back and creating something that's abstract to tell a story that they want to tell, show it through a different lens. So you look at games like Fez, you look at games like Limbo, you look at games like Minecraft. They're not pushing realism. They're pushing a particular idea. Technology is at their disposal.
Or Braid.
Do you agree?
Absolutely. I mean, 100%. Like, that's only allowed, it's only available because the commercial, the commercial barriers to doing that have been, to a large degree, removed. So now you've got marketplaces to sell this stuff. I went to school for film originally. I always wondered why, once we have digital equipment, when I first went to school, we had, VHS camcorders. Even though I knew just 1 or 2 years down the road, Final Cut came out, digital video. Now you can shoot and edit a movie on your phone, but you don't see a lot of those movies in the theater. You don't rent them on pay-per-view because there's no market for them. You can put them on YouTube and maybe somebody will watch it, but you won't make money off of it. What's interesting about games is that there's actually a market for that stuff. You can actually put it out into a marketplace. People can play it. You can create a game that, just a couple people has as much polish as anything else you'd buy from a AAA studio 10 years ago. And you could pay money for it, and that person could have a successful career creating those games. And that is, that's the great democratization, right? That individuals or former professional developers can peel away from the larger studio system and go to this independent system. But it gives you this opportunity to tell a story, to do it in a different context. I think the games you pointed out are perfect. All of those games are under $15. That's very interesting, and especially when you get to the mobile platforms, a lot of them are free. So Yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely where we're headed and what we're doing. And I think, like I said, inversely, the other direction is when you do create technology as the barrier that you need to break through, breaking through today's technological barrier is such a massive, almost crushing obstacle to do it. And it's only going to be the biggest, most well-funded teams. Even when you look at a studio like Ubisoft, they have 200-person development studios, and even that's not enough to make a new game. They use 3 of them. It's gotten so kind of out of control. But yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think it's creatively, it makes right now one of the most exciting times to be playing games, to be writing about games. I think it also makes to be creating them to be very scary, and there's a lot of opacity about where things are going.
I guess 2 thoughts. One is about the nature of what is technology, and I guess the second is about how industry matures. So first of all, just in terms of technology, I mean, I think one of the things that we tend to think of technology just in terms of going more towards greater realism.
Horsepower.
Right. But technology is a lot of different things. Technology is basically an advancement that allows you to do something better. So a better distribution network is new technology. That's sometimes just as important as the ability to sort of render better images. So just to take an example outside video games, why did jigsaw puzzles become really popular in the 1930s? People had jigsaw puzzles before then, and actually they've begun to sell them more, but you have the combination of cardboard and die casting, so you can make cheap jigsaw puzzles, and also everyone's out of work and has plenty of time and they need cheap entertainment. So that's not technology, that's society, I guess. But so that's a technology that made things possible and did things. So with video games, there are a lot of technologies that are happening, and I think the distribution network and those sort of technology are just as important as the horsepower. The second point is just as an industry matures, just people, and this maybe gets to the art angle, they want to have deeper forms of expression that aren't just about maybe graphical realism. And again, think of something like children's books. Children's books for a long time through the 19th century, it's about how do you get better realism. You go from woodcuts to a technique like chromolithography, which can give you really wonderful images, to sort of 4-color printing or things that are maybe cheaper. But eventually artists want to go back, and they go, hey, well, what if we go back to woodcuts and see what they can do? And then what you have actually then are cultural organizations, like if you look in like the Caldecott Awards for children's books, they say, hey, let's reward high quality artists doing things. And I think that's what you're seeing in the game industry. All these indie awards and things that are happening, or different awards saying, hey, let's just let's focus on some of these different creative aspects. So maybe that gets more at the artistic desire that comes out as industry matures.
Well, I mean, the way corporate America looks at art, though, is like we've been hired on many occasions to facilitate art for apps and games, and a lot of times we don't end up taking the job because a lot of times it's, hey guys, we got this thing, we just need some art for it. It's like, well, what?
Just art it.
Like just some stuff? Like just throw some pictures at it?
I just happen to have a folder of art right here.
But it's amazing that these companies aren't considering that aspect earlier. It's kind of astounding. And there's an infrastructure to games, and it allows for design to happen before art's applied to it. But it's more about than just skinning the game. It's about how it influences and your choices that you're making with that art. So it's not just this artist who can supply art, it's about the right artist that can supply the art. And then you get into the deeper question of, well, like, why wasn't the artist involved from the very beginning? Like, why isn't that person there helping you make choices and being collaborative? Like, for me, the creative process from the beginning is important to have all those different types of people around, because they're gonna have opinions that you won't have. Like me not being able to use Photoshop really well or Illustrator is gonna affect my opinion of something, but you're gonna tell me as an Illustrator professional that I'm crazy, or like, oh no, there's this new thing that just came out that we can do this and we can actually achieve that. I think stylization is super, super important. Like a game like Braid is amazing to look at. What's the black and white game? Limbo, yes. Limbo is I was drawn to that not because I knew anything about the game, but because of the way it looked. It was very, very appealing.
Limbo got a lot of buzz as a Flash demo in 2005, like 5 years before it even came out, just because it looked so unique. Like that look also helped it sell 1 million plus units. Like,
but that look also influenced its suspense and its drama
Absolutely.
and its gameplay. And like the idea of it being black and white wasn't, it was deeper than that. It was the idea of using shadows and light to play with your sensory like experience of that game.
And the bright eyes of the protagonist.
It's menacing sometimes, like the weird spider creatures you know get conflicted with. And
also horribly graphic sometimes. But you know, like that, so that was a game made by, I don't know, less than 10 people and young kids in Denmark. You know what I mean? Like that just wasn't an opportunity that existed before.
But it's about that choice. Like you say, we have all the resources in the world now to make the most photorealistic game imaginable. I remember in Newsweek years ago when PlayStation 2 was announced, someone from Sony said that
Toy Story.
said that the graphics of the next PlayStation, like speaking about PlayStation 3, would have better than reality graphics with a refresh rate faster than the human eye could ever process. Like, why?
They also said PlayStation.
Like, what was the point of that? Like, I want to be able to see that.
Better than real graphics. They also said it would be, quote,
Better than
they also said it would be 4D, which I'm not quite sure makes a lot of sense.
Smell-o-vision hadn't been perfected.
Well, like, well, we're there apparently. PlayStation, no, they don't have that, but
You just can't see how much better.
That's right. So if anybody has any questions for the panelists, please go over to the mics because this is being broadcast. So don't be embarrassed. Get up some mics. And while you're going there, since, John, you brought up the art piece while people are queuing up to ask these questions, I want to ask you this one thing. Because a commercial venture is behind it, does it negate a piece of work as being art?
not at all. I don't think so at all. I think there's, I mean, film is a great example of artistry. Like, I was watching this Woody Allen documentary, so I've mentioned him several times now. But it's amazing when he shot Manhattan in black and white. Like, the attention to detail and the beauty and the photography alone of that movie, it's not known necessarily for that. It's known more for story, much like Annie Hall, much like any of his stuff. But he, as an artist, spends a lot of time worrying about visuals when his movies aren't really considered visual movies, but they are. That's why you like them so much, because he uses the visuals to emphasize the drama and the comedy. I think it's such a waste if corporate America, in making these huge games, doesn't pay attention to that. And I think there's key people in huge games like Call of Duty that really do care. But sometimes it gets overshadowed by it not having 32-player multiplayer versus 18. Like, how dare you not have that extra 12 people?
Gotta have those people.
Thanks. All right, we'll start over here. You, sir.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about digital asset management and preservation, especially as it relates to proprietary systems? Like if you have a series of BlackBerries that comes with a game like Brick Breaker that really doesn't have any kind of use on another system like an iPhone because it doesn't have like a scroll wheel in the middle. Can you speak a little bit about that and how something like that would be preserved without necessarily having BlackBerries 50 years from now?
Sounds like a good question.
Good question. Yeah, any of you guys want to take that one?
I'll jump on it. Nobody likes Brick Breaker.
No, I think it's, one of the things we do is actually we collect a lot of hardware. So right now we have a project where we're actually testing a lot of the games in our collection, and one of the reasons for doing it is to make sure we actually have all the hardware to play it. That's not going to work 100 years from now. And I know some people asked questions earlier about arcade games. We can talk about that. That's a whole interesting how you keep these games going. And it's sometimes PC games are often terrible because and you see the changes in sort of DRM over time from look on page 17 of the guide for the fifth word down, and that would be the code you enter. Or there's a game from Westwood where they're like
The code wheel?
it has one has I think it has like 10 different Donald Ducks. It's a kid's game, and you need to match which Donald Duck is an image of them goes with the game. Although what we find with some of our old PC games, you have to go to a website that has a password in it or something. Well, the game's from 1999 or something. Good luck trying to find on the Wayback Machine and in our archive trying to find that or something. So it's a huge problem. Bottom line is, right now we're trying to keep the hardware going as much as we can, but it's a problem that I think probably require more industry cooperation at some point too to really deal with long term.
I mean, you had a very elegant way of putting it when we interviewed you, which was to say that it's not so much just the software, it's these Rosetta Stones, basically, these individual Rosetta Stones of technology that will be required to translate 50 years from now exactly how the gameplay felt, what it meant. It also comes down to whether or not it's worth preserving in every one of its forms, right? A game like Brick Breaker.
How dare you? Don't say what you're going to say. Brick Breaker's not worth it?
No. Brick Breaker, definitely worth it. But it's not, and you're not going to be able to capture it in every instance, just as we're not going to capture Snake in every instance, right?
It's interesting that I think it's such a failure of every industry to compete so fervently over like formats too and operating systems. Like HD DVD versus Blu-ray. The reason why Blu-ray won wasn't because HD DVD wasn't a superior format. It was because Sony paid millions of dollars to studios to have exclusives. They paid Warner Brothers $300 million to say never release on any other format. And so Warner Brothers is like, okay. And then Fox got $200 million. Like they paid about $1 billion to studios just to shut up and not pay attention to HD DVD.
And then we got to Netflix stream all of our movies anyway.
Yeah.
So.
Well, now it's like, but Netflix and Hulu and HBO has their own thing and Showtime has their own thing. It's like, everyone needs to work together. Like all these operating systems just don't make sense. And it's
the future of curation for all this stuff is everybody working together to get a standard.
Well, I mean, for archivists to actually have a job that makes sense to a certain degree, like it's impossible. It really is. And games are the worst offender. I mean, you have Blackberries and 20 different kinds of cell phones. I kind of hate my Android because I want to play iPhone games. But it's like, why can't I just play iPhone games on my Android? Because Apple doesn't want to work with, like...
It's not that developers, we've interviewed a lot of Android developers, they just hate developing for 800 devices.
Yeah, it's really limiting. I mean, internet browser, same thing. Like, I mean, with you working on the website, it's the same sort of deal. It's like you have tablets, you have browsers, you have all that.
Not to belabor the point, but the equivalent, the analogy is interactive medium, interactive technology needs to have the same set of standards that passive technology does, or passive content. NTSC means that I can watch the same broadcast on 1,000 different devices, so long as they all conform to NTSC. And so the authority of that content is retained, regardless if it's on a 2-inch screen or a Jumbotron. We do not have the same opportunity for interactive media because it's specific to the
That broadens your ability to reach people in general,
that's right.
Which is, that's where the industry is really self-destructive. It's not like it's going to go away, but it definitely limits audiences.
Yep.
I mean, to your question, though, too, like Resident Evil 4 was made for the GameCube. Like, it was made for the A/B button configuration of that system. It is not as fun to play on PlayStation 2 or on Wii or whatever system it was ported to. So, like, archiving that, like, I mean, there's core systems that things originate on. Is that the best thing to archive? Is it the easiest thing to archive? There's so many things wrong with the system, but we're dealing with, how do you archive arcade games? Like, how do you save them for 100 years?
Well, there's a...
Freeze them.
Yeah, we let guests play with them. No, actually, it gets back to the question earlier. There's a writer, Howard Mansfield, who has a book called The Same Axe Twice. And he starts by saying there's a farmer who says, I've had the same axe. I've changed the handle 3 times and the head of the axe twice. Question is it the same axe? And so there's this question with arcade games. If I change out the monitor, if I've changed out the boards on it, if I've changed out the controllers, if I've had to change the side art in it, if the cabinet is falling apart, deteriorating, I had to change that. Is it still the same game? And to me, in some ways, the best analogy for a lot of video game preservation is actually architectural preservation. And you think about with a house, all the time you're making choices with, and it's not a perfect analogy, I don't want to push it too far, but are you saving the house in pristine condition? Are you saving it as it was lived in at a certain moment in time? Or say this house has been lived in 100 years from now. I mean, what version of Doom are you using? 100 years, do you keep the house? Do you make it a museum? What are the choices you make? If you're living in the house, do you save the leaded glass, but you get rid of the lead pipes? Yet somehow we still know it's the same house. And sometimes you need to do an emulated version. If you go to Colonial Williamsburg, most of Colonial Williamsburg is 18th century emulation. And there are a few houses that were there. The church itself, I think, goes back. But the rest of it, John D. Rockefeller poured a lot of money into it. Yet there's still a certain presence there. And so all these, you have a variety of different choices you make, and none of them are perfect, and any one of them is debatable as you go about it.
So in order to try to get to as many people too, we'll try to keep our answers more succinct as well, and we'll be around afterwards too. So thank you very much. Over here.
Hi. So my question, as I understand it, video game preservation is more for like a scholarly kind of thing, or for like some government purpose. But do you think it should or could even be for the general public? Yeah, I understand that like that would be like a very difficult task. But one of my favorite games is Jackal on the NES. But potentially in 20 years, I won't be able to play it. But my hope is that a museum would be able to not only like preserve it better than I'm doing, but make it so that I can still play it, because all I'm doing to preserve it is putting it in a bin in my basement, and I'm thinking that in a few years that's not going to be enough.
Great question.
I'll keep it really quick. First of all, I think museums, by creating exhibits, what you guys have had enormous attendance. I mean, we get like about 575,000 people a year going through and playing arcade games and doing that sort of stuff. You guys had like 700,000 or something during the run of this show here. So you wanted to make it open for the public. The other, though, you won't be able to make every game. We can't make every game. Just you guys had to choose. We can't make every game available to the public. The other thing I would say is that I think institutions like ours are doing a great job, but actually it's been private individuals and groups of private individuals who have really led the way in a lot of game preservation. On forums, and people who are doing stuff like the Software Preservation Society over in Europe, which created something called CryoFlux, which is for disk imaging. And so a lot of private individuals are having a really crucial role. Institutions aren't usually pioneers. Usually they come behind and say, okay, we can create these conditions to store things. We can bring a certain degree of permanence. We can bring public recognition, but it's often private individuals do stuff first.
Yeah, I think too, one of the discussions that we've been having as part of the IGDA SIG that's looking at preservation is there's going to be a tremendous amount of data out there that no one group is going to be able to actually catalog. So the question is, how do we go ahead and provide the general public enough guidance to accurately catalog it? And one of the questions is, well, can the public really do this? Then you go back and you look at Wikipedia, and the comb through Wikipedia is showing the accuracy level of Wikipedia today after it went through this, this massive amount of garbage that hit it, and then it kind of policed itself, is incredibly accurate today. So not in all cases, but in most.
I've had people rewrite our company history. I'm like, what are you doing? Like,
Sorry
you're wrong.
They do it under your name. So
I just want
thank
to
you.
change something.
Thank you.
So there'll be a mix, I think, between the two. Thank you. Yes, this side.
So many people play games, and most of those are major titles, and majority of those are made by big studios like Ubisoft or Activision. I was just wondering, how much does the culture within the development studios, do you think, is there any correlation between the culture of the developers and the development studio of these 200 people? And is there any correlation between that and the players who are actually playing those games? Does it translate in any way? Does it affect the culture within the gaming ecosystem or whatever like that?
So let me get this straight. The question is there a correlation between the audience for a game and the people who made that game?
Yeah, I mean, similar to that, like how they actually, like what happens inside the development studio and the way they think and their ideologies or whatever it is, like how much does that either directly or indirectly affect the end player?
I don't know. I feel like when you get to some of those big games that the ratio between development size and audience size is so disparate, the delta there is so extreme that it'd be pretty hard to make any kind of strong correlation. If you look at, between all the different studios that actually work on core gameplay content for a Call of Duty title, you've got 200 people maybe. I think it was 300 for Black Ops. Compared to the number of people that buy the thing, right, which is 14 million people. I mean, like 300 to 14 million, it's...
I mean, when they're reaching this many amount of people, is like so many are being exposed to something that that was a vision of whatever the studio was, and 200 people made this, and so isn't it that there should be some responsibility within the development studio also to have a certain set of code of conduct or something like that, and something that will work at the end consumer?
Okay, so what you're saying is the small development group affecting, or having that voice reach so many people, what is the responsibility of that developer to either reflect what it is they want to see, or what is their responsibility, the message that they deliver? Is that correct? Is that the question?
Yeah.
Okay. I think when you look at designers like Hideo Kojima, he has a very specific thing that he wants to say. And the success in delivering that vision, that story, has granted him the authority to continue to do that. Not everybody gets to do that. What I also find in talking to a lot of my friends who have been developing games for a long time, we're all kind of getting to the age where they say, yeah, I'm really excited about working on this one particular game, but the games I'd really like to focus on look like this. And a lot of them have to do with their children. A lot of them have to do with the fact that saying, I'm playing more games now with my kids than I ever did before. And so my tastes are going to start to change. So even though I have a responsibility to a particular franchise or to deliver a particular thing because I have an obligation to a company or to a team I work with, man, I really want to find my way to do this and deliver that part of me to the world. And this goes to what we're talking about with having accessibility of tools so small teams can get in and build the experiences that people want to build out of themselves, that put out there, versus just work within a bigger team. So I think we're finding this struggle right now within the development community themselves.
Yeah, I think in a game like, you mentioned Ubisoft and Activision, so take the two biggest games there, Assassin's Creed and Call of Duty. I think that their obligation in a lot of parts, and this is the nature of sequels, why a lot of people get frustrated with sequels. I'm not one of them. I think I really respect and appreciate a lot of what sequels do. I think I sometimes compare video games to cars, right? They're machines, and you can refine that machine. But I think their obligation is to expectations, right? You're playing Call of Duty, and you're buying a new Call of Duty game. You have expectations of what a Call of Duty game is, and that's their ultimate obligation. Same with Assassin's Creed. I read a quote the other day that I think the project director on Assassin's Creed 3 says, this is a new IP. And it's like, well, maybe not. You play an assassin who can climb buildings and kill people. So it's maybe not exactly a new IP. But I think their obligation is to expectation, which sometimes can be very stifling. That's why I think a lot of people get frustrated working in the industry and they want to leave and do something different. But I also think that a lot of what's interesting about those games is the mechanical refinement between certain versions. If you read about the Pick-10 system in Black Ops 2, I think that's really interesting. I think there's a lot of really smart ideas in that. They basically rewrote the rules of football when football was at its most popular. I think that's really ambitious. But is that as accessible as saying this is Limbo? It looks different. It plays different. Versus the way that you load out your perks and guns in Black Ops 2 is different than the last one. It's a little niche.
It's a big move, though. It is a big move. You're removing the foundation of the house.
They're scooping it out.
And they're doing it in a very limited window of time.
I'm a video game nerd. I can be snobby. I love me some Call of Duty.
Yeah, Call of Duty is a great game, and that team is really spot on with a lot of their stuff. But ultimately, they have 18 months to make that game, much like Iron Man 3 is going to come out, whether Robert Downey Jr. has a sprained ankle or not. It's like they're going to make that movie. It's going to come out. They're not going to delay it. Why would they delay it?
Just CGI his ankle.
That's right.
No problem.
Well, look what they did with the sequel to Tron, right?
Yeah.
They could CGI anything. Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hi. This summer I was at a colloquium that talked about the impact of video games on society. A lot of people talked about the gamification of culture. And I would be interested in finding out what you guys thought about that. One of the examples, one of the guys talked about the protein folding game, where people were using their protein folding skills to actually figure out how proteins were folded in DNA. And that went on to scientists, so it had these real-world ramifications. So that's like one example. So what do you guys think of it?
Gamification.
It's awesome. I mean, Nike.
It can be awesome.
Yeah. There's
Right.
you can do bad applications of it, but Nike Plus is a really interesting, simple version of it. But it's helping people be healthy.
That's right.
It just gives you a tracking method that's fun, and it's just like collecting coins in Mario.
Like I was saying, video games are mechanical in a lot of ways, and we've polished, we've refined so many mechanics over time. And it was only a matter of time before somebody else realized, it's kind of like you're saying, like, video games are at the forefront of technology, right? They push computer technology forward. For a lot of people, their PlayStation 3 might be the most powerful computer they have in their house.
Absolutely.
Microsoft next year is going to ship, or I guess this year, some of it, but next year they're going to ship an Xbox 720. It'll probably be super powerful. And this year they're going to ship a Windows tablet that runs on an ARM processor. Like, talk about a split, right? Like, video games, if you look at the processor that's in your graphics card in your gaming PC, it's a lot more expensive than the CPU. Like, the gaming part has pushed the limits of technology more than the general computing part. I think that's true, with a lot of things, that it's, that's sort of been the vanguard.
But I mean, the Kinect is old Israeli military technology converted to the masses. Like, gaming pushed that technology further.
So that gamification or militarization of gaming, I don't know what.
It goes both ways.
Despite the fact that this is being webcast, I probably shouldn't say this. I have to say, the gamification stuff, there's part of me, I totally get what you're saying about elements going in there, but from a basic play point of view, I'm a little bit wary of it.
I'm innately distrustful of it, don't get me wrong.
And so I think when you look at what are the characteristics of play, usually play is voluntary, play is fun, and play is its own end. You play for the sake of playing. You don't play to get something else. I think this is the problem that's bedeviled sort of the whole serious games industry since its beginning, is that once you start using play for some other purpose, people start to say, well, am I being manipulated here? Is this still voluntary? Or why am I playing if it's just not for the sake of playing? And so I think it doesn't mean it's not creeping into more and more. And again, I actually just spoke on this recently. I went back to John Locke about 300 years, looked at sort of how play is being used has been more and more. But I do think I'm a little bit skeptical when I hear people say, okay, I'm going to solve all my problems or all society's problems through games. Because I think people will sort of say at some point, well, that's not what I play. I play to have fun. I play just for the sake of playing. It's not saying that there aren't great benefits that come from playing. It's like when I roughhouse with my kids. They're gaining strength. They're gaining physical coordination. They're learning social skills, how to read me or their friends. So if I start crying, they know to stop.
Put the knife down.
Yeah.
You tell them it's not them, it's just you being 42.
Yeah, exactly.
I do the same thing.
But that's not why they roughhouse. They don't roughhouse for those skills. But they gain all those. So when we start using play or games for some ulterior motive, I just don't know if it'll work too well. So that's sort of my caution. But I love gamification.
But that said, I mean, the worry is that it's being exploitive, right? That like if you give people 100 coins to collect for no other reason than collect 100 coins, that there's some OCD trigger that you're going to set off in somebody's head. They're going to want to gobble up all those coins.
I'll win a cake? What?
Yeah,
got to catch them all.
I actually, yeah, that's true. Yeah. So
look at this
Street
guy.
passing.
yeah.
I'm engaging in gamification right here.
It has
right?
to be personal satisfaction in this game.
Yeah.
That's the reward. And ultimately, it's
Right.
not.
Some people like to collect achievements in games. Some people don't care.
Yeah, and a lot of it is just convincing people to, it's almost like the old idea of suspension of disbelief in literature, that I will willingly go into this. There's a suspension of skepticism that needs to take place.
Yeah.
And I'll join in with you because you've given me enough incentive to do so.
I mean, specific to the example that you gave, which was the Folding at Home project, that was never a gamification thing. But what happened was you gave a framework where there was an opportunity to be competitive with others, and so people gamed this. They created a game.
It's a meta game.
Right. So you could join, the group that is part of this. So as long as you tagged it that way, you then are identified with a larger group of people, and we're going to be better than those people. And so you create those competitive frameworks. And as a result, I think at the time when Folding at Home really kind of first took off with PlayStation 3, I think they said something like it had accelerated research by 20 years because you had these, 8-core PS3s doing nothing but churning through protein folding and just, rocketing the data back across the web.
It'll work because human nature is naturally competitive.
That's exactly right.
But which can be really productive. It's about community and engaging the community in some way. And you can't just get a group of people together. If I told you all I wanted to help me fold proteins right now, you'd all run out of the room. But make a game out of it, or provide some sort of like,
It's like origami.
That's right.
Fold.
So gamification can be great. Just like anything else, we're still discovering how to use it to its best effect.
I'm also inherently wary of large corporations that want to become more efficient through gamification. Oh, it's easy. You guys don't want to do your annual reports? Well, just gamify it. No problem. Give me some points. Here's a whole bunch of points for doing that.
Points being your paycheck. Yes.
One thing I'm kind of concerned of is, about all the gimmicks gaming is going to have today, like 3D, motion control, good graphics. It's not that I mind any of that stuff, but, after every last gun has been put into any game that you can do, or, after virtual reality comes along and blows our minds, where else is gaming going to go from there?
Well, the world's ending in
Holographic
2012, so we don't have to worry about that, right?
Yeah, we only got another
Well, I
good
mean, give or take 30 years, everything's going to be like, maxed out. Like every gimmick that we imagine today is going to probably be used now. So, I mean, like, what's going to happen to gaming? Is there going to be new forms of controls or new gameplay? Like, what's going to happen in 30 years to gaming?
I guess, again, just looking at it historically, I think, to me, a lot of, there have been constant, just when you think, okay, we've tapped out this avenue, a new form of gaming comes up, and maybe it's from something that, who would have thought of that in the 1960s? Who would have thought that games, pen and paper games could go anywhere? Well, then you have these guys, Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson, create this whole Dungeons and Dragons thing, and I mean, that went nowhere, but no, but out of this, you have this whole genre that is created now. Tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions are playing essentially RPGs, and all the elements, the levels, the hit points, health points, whatever, have all integrated there. Again, look at Minecraft. It's essentially what Legos with taking advantage of what computers can do. So I guess I would look to see. And this is just because I'm coming from a play angle, but what aspects of play are not being exploited yet in games? What do people do? And I think this is where the social stuff came in so much with Words with Friends and that sort of thing. I was just mentioning earlier a game I love, I just saw, is Johann Sebastian Joust. Has anyone?
That was the game I was literally just thinking about.
Yeah. Is anyone familiar with that game? So all it is just, it's move controllers and people circling around trying to knock each other's moves. There's no screen in it.
And it's one of the most unique gaming experiences I've had in years.
Yeah. And so how can you use electronic games to integrate then in the real world, maybe in a way? That might be one area. So I think, I think there's a lot of potential there. And usually just when we think it's getting tapped out, someone comes in totally from left field and does something completely different. So I'm hopeful.
I'm not nervous about the evolution of technology providing new tools. I mean, artists today, art's been around for like at least 50 years, right?
At least.
I think at least 50 years.
You're pushing it.
And
roughly
50 years, at the same time when dinosaurs died.
That's right.
And artists are still coming up with new tools, new techniques, new methods. Even if it's just oil paint, they're coming up with new materials to put oil paint on. You see a lot of acrylic paint on Tyvek now, right? Thanks for the invention of Tyvek, DuPont. It's like there's constantly new technology that provides new, influence, new resources for artists to use. And I think, I think maybe 50 years ago people thought, oh man, the car industry, where are we going to go from here? We nailed it, and that changed.
Four wheels, that's the thing.
Back to bicycles.
Guys, seatbelts, we got it. Just give up, go home. But I think we're always going to have a technological evolution at some point, probably in 10 years or so. We're just going to plug something into our spinal cord.
Eggs and stems, man.
But then we get two spinal cords maybe, and it's even better. So I don't know. But I'm not worried about that.
Read Ready Player One would be a good.
Yeah.
Companies avidly invest in trying to exploit what they already have too. Like Microsoft pays studios a good amount of money to experiment with Kinect. Just hack it.
First
party. Do whatever you want. That stuff never really comes out or sees the light of day. But they want to know what's possible, and they know people have to break things to make other things possible.
Yeah, I mean, consider the controls that you have on a typical game controller, right? I mean, one of the vestiges of the earlier console games is the control pad, which is present on every modern day controller. Even the Wii's remote, they couldn't get away from not having that physical, cross, that cross movement. However, there are other things that we're going to start to look at, things like geolocation-based information that then overlays your physical presence to the gameplay environments you have. One of the ones that isn't actually a game, but it's an incredible motivator. It's this application for your mobile phone that as you're running, it uses the pedometer in your GPS location to track where you are in the city. And then you're listening to your music, and all of a sudden you'll hear a chapter story about zombies that are chasing you. And it says you need to run to like this real place within this amount of time before they get you. And the slower you get, the louder the zombies get behind you, and the faster you run, the softer they get. And listening to one of the guys reviewing, he said he came ripping around the corner, and this guy just shrieked and dropped all this stuff, and he was like, I'm running from zombies, I can't, I'm sorry, And he's just running. And he said it motivated him to run. And so they're using a gameplay tactic to alter what he's actually doing physically. And I think that's incredibly exciting.
It's called Zombie Run. Remember what I said before about putting zombie in the title? There you go.
And you will run from zombies.
Not necessarily virtual
augmented reality.
Augmented reality maybe is it better. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. We have a question here, and then this one, I think we're finished.
Yes, my question is basically similar to his about augmented reality. I'm wondering, how do you see that using with newer technologies that are coming out, like Google Glass?
If Google Glass ever comes out, I'm not convinced. Yeah, I mean, I think you're going to start to see that. I mean, you can already see it today in some games. There's the AR copter, and you can fly it and shoot stuff. Yeah, I mean, that technology is inevitable. And so the fact that you can already see it today with the devices that we carry around in our pockets, that's pretty impressive. But I wouldn't be surprised to see kind of major investment from, let's say, a console company in the next 5-10 years.
I think it's infantile right now. I mean, it's very archaic.
Yeah.
It's just to me funny. I was reading a book on war games from 1978, and they're talking about, if any of you played in the Avalon Hill games and those sort of things, they're talking about all those. And then they said, and then there's this company doing this game out in California where you wear these vests and you have these guns and you shoot lasers at each other. And this is going to be the great new electronic game of the future. I thought, wow, I never thought of laser tag as the electronic game, but it's essentially it's augmented reality, I suppose, really, from technology that's 40 years old. So there's a lot of possibility there. But who knows how we'll conserve it and keep it in museums? I don't know.
I saw game designer Clint Hawking give a talk once, and he was talking about augmented reality as basically being the future. If you're walking down the street and we know what everything looks like in the whole world because it's all been photographed and mapped and geo-positioned, and you've got glasses on and it's reading everything in real time, or maybe you've got an implant in your eye, what's to say you don't get points for like watching somebody trip 3 times in a day? It's the 3rd time you saw somebody trip today, you get some points. Like everything kind of becomes gameplay, it all becomes wrapped in it, and there could be emergent opportunities if there's a bunch of people in one space that have the same interest. Maybe it's like, now you get to have a shootout because there's 8 other people in the same exact space at the same time, and it just pops up.
When I talked about modifying behavior, we're not advocating people go out and trip other people to get the achievement.
No, because you want to get the achievement for that. So that's cheating.
Yeah.
You would get an achievement, though, for tripping 3 people.
The one thing I was going to say is inevitably what happens is when you get these trends, then you get the sort of the reaction. And so I mentioned Euro games earlier, which are just board games. As these things become more and more pervasive, people are going to want to retreat to go to something that's maybe not as pervasive, that's simpler, whether it's electronic or non-electronic.
Also, we won't have any power in the future. So we have to worry about that.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Thank you.
I pray that one day David Fincher's The Game becomes a reality, where like it's not just for rich people. But
Or like, was that game Majestic?
Yeah,
Like,
Majestic did not
you?
work very well. But yeah,
Get weird
EA's
emails.
failed experiment. It was novel though.
But
Yeah.
so that's a great point with the Majestic. So does everyone know what Majestic was? A couple of you?
It was like, that was 10 years ago?
And it wasn't even a video game. It was a story game that just happened to use technology to and reach out and touch you in a variety of different ways through instant messaging and fax and so on and so forth. And I spoke to Neil Young, who was the creator of the game, not the musician. I also, it was the first panel I sat on with him, E3, and they had done it in Java, which I was very happy they had done it that way. And he said, well, the coolest thing about it was just by suggesting to people that this system they can't see was going to interact with them. He said, people had signed up for the game, and all of a sudden they'd just start getting phone calls of people going, oh my God, my phone rang in the middle of the night last night, and I picked it up and no one was there. Oh, the game's freaking me out. And he's like, game hasn't started yet. Like, that was the sort of thing. But it's like, okay, that's really cool. Because if people want to give themselves up to the experience, they will. And at the end of the day, games are about, in my opinion, and everyone has their opinion, but games, all kinds of games, video games and board games to, games we play to learn about our world, are about finding your connection to other people's thoughts or people themselves. That's what it's about. It's identifying some of yourself, some of your desires, fears, interests within the material that you're absorbing and finding a way to connect with that original thought or for people themselves. I think one of the interesting things about video games, even though we can go ahead and play online with, with hundreds, thousands of people at the same time in an environment, there's still something about, I know all of us have done this, sit at a LAN party. Yes, I could go play Battlefield at home with people, but if I'm there in the room, it changes, it alters that experience.
The first LAN party I ever went to was flying from California all the way to DC to play in a ballroom in a hotel with like 100 people. Because I wanted that experience. It's more than just novel, it's important.
It's a fighting game community, right? Like that community exists because playing fighting games in meet space with people is important. I think to your question, like the idea of removing gaming from the living room and getting it outside, I think you see pretty much every major gaming company right now investing in that exact idea. These things, get outside there, interact with other people that might have a 3DS. It makes a lot more sense when you're in Japan. Here, you've got to come to a video game panel and keep it on the table.
Is it working?
It is.
Oh.
And then, but Sony has with PlayStation V has Nier, which if I could figure out how exactly it worked or what it did. Has some of those ideas in it, of getting out and like interacting with people, going to certain places. Microsoft's going to do it with a Windows Phone, presumably in the next Xbox. Like, a lot of companies are putting their money into that connection already, so it's a lot of fun too.
In some ways, it's just this very old idea. It's a treasure hunt. And if you look, again, getting with technology, does anyone ever remember this book came out probably late 70s, early 80s called Masquerade? It was a picture book out of England. I see one person nodding. It was a treasure hunt, and this jeweler in England, he created this golden rabbit, and he buried it somewhere in England, and he created this beautiful book in which there were all these clues, clues in the pictures, clues in the writing, clues in the story, and it created this frenzy in England in which people were searching, digging up holes people find their gardens dug up because people were convinced the rabbit was buried there. And I remember actually getting it as a kid for Christmas and trying to solve it, little realizing that it had already been solved, and it was in England, and I was in Connecticut. Not going to get it over there, but it's still figuring it out. To me, what's the most successful sort of electronic game doing this already is geocaching. To me, that's, and that's or letterboxing is another one. That's a very successful electronic game to me because in some ways it's physical, but you're requiring this electronic distribution method to get the stuff out there and this electronic device you're carrying with you. And so there'll be a lot more of this. But again, the idea of a treasure hunt is something that's pretty old.
I think people forget how much human experience plays into everything we do, and that's going to drive all technology. Like, I feel like that's where everything is going with games, like figuring out how people will interact more robustly than just being on a microphone on Xbox Live. Like
asynchronous Scrabble.
Yeah.
It's easy.
And it's so simple, and it is being around a table with 1 million people.
See, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that The woman at the Smithsonian American Art Museum here that I connected with is Georgina Goodlander. She worked on the exhibition with me. How I connected to her was through an event they held here, but what piqued my interest about the work she was doing was she did the very first alternate reality game at the Smithsonian. In fact, the very first one for a major museum to undertake. And it started with a bodybuilder crashing a panel at, I think, South by Southwest with tattoos all over his body and flexing. There were clues that started this whole thing off. It was called Ghost of a Chance. She won this prestigious award at the museum for it because it just got people in and trying to dissect this story, and they're interacting with the artwork in the space, and they were ingesting materials into the museum archive that weren't real materials. They were being created by the public just for the sake of this game. But it just showed that people want, if you give people the ability to reach out and participate in a shared experience, they absolutely will. Absolutely will. Whether it's virtual or in meet space, they want to be together, they want to connect, to discover, to find each other, find connection.
To discuss. I mean, gossip propels society in so many ways. I mean, whether it's a newspaper, which is essentially gossip, like it's political or whatever, it's not about a celebrity per se. But the people want to talk about things with other people. They want to have conversations, and like that's going to persist.
Stories.
Yeah. At the end, of it, that's what it is. So with that, I'd like to say that
stories are good. That's the end of the
stories are good. And that's what's all about. And the fact is that we're just starting these stories. Video games are still a very, very early medium in human history and human culture. I believe they are going to prove to be one of the most important forms of expression that we have moving forward on a global basis because of the breadth that they allow and afford the artists and people that want to create with them. So with that, I'd like to thank my panelists. Jon
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, thank you.
Oh, JP and Chris. So if we can please give them a round of applause.